Coordination, what's good? I have a great episode today for you with Evan Miyazono, who is the head of research at Protocol Labs, working on the network goods group. Basically, Protocol Labs and Gitcoin have both independently just kind of started working on similar things over the last couple of years. Protocol Labs produces a conference called Funding the Commons. Gitcoin produces a conference called Schelling, and they're both convening the people to talk about how we fund public goods, how do we fund the commons, how do we coordinate in order to create better societal outcomes using Web3. And we've just both independently started running these things and doing at scale experiments in how we can do that. Most of the episode, we talked about an idea that Evan and I are both really excited about called impact certificates. So I think that you as a listener may know about carbon credits, which is basically like I took 10 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere and basically getting financially rewarded for that. But imagine a world in which we could generalize carbon credits into any sort of impact. Say you take 10 people out of poverty. Say you fund a ETH2 client for a year and you can mint an NFT or a verifiable credential proving that you've done that. What kind of world would it create in which there was demand for impact certificates and people wanted to actually buy those impact certificates from you? Then what we could do is we could create a systemic incentive for the world's actors to work on the commons and to work on impact, and then they instantly have a business model because there's demand for the impact certificates that they are generating. So there are problems with this idea, and we discuss soberly what has to happen with respect to gas costs, with legitimacy of the impact certificates. Creating a market for these impact certificates is no easy task, but I think that Evan is one of the most lucid thinkers for us to go into these topics of impact certificates and how they could build towards a world in which the value created by people who are creating impact approaches their ability to capture value, to put food on the table, to pay their mortgage. And it's just such an interesting design space to start with such a small experiment with impact certificates and think about what the world would look like if it was maximally successful. And that's why I really enjoy this episode with Evan from Protocol Labs. So Coordination, I think you're going to like the episode too. It's one of those kind of mind expanding episodes, and Evan is just such a good thinker and speaker on this subject. So without further ado, I give you Evan Miyazono from Protocol Labs. Enjoy.
OPOLIS is a member-owned digital employment cooperative offering payroll, health insurance, and membership perks that go beyond the basics that you would find at your normal 9-to-5. OPOLIS offers not only health benefits, but also pay stubs and W-2s, workers' comp, and unemployment insurance, as well as disability benefits for independent DAO workers that are traditionally reserved for regular employment situations. OPOLIS provides a tax-compliant way to get your paycheck in crypto and professionalize your work-life situation. OPOLIS members enjoy an average of 20 to 50% savings on top-rated national group health insurances, as well as self-sovereign portable employment. You can also get tokenized rewards based on consumption, staking, and referrals, and also the ability to fund payroll in fiat and stablecoins without the use of centralized exchange. You can also receive paychecks in fiat and whitelisted digital currencies. So sign up for OPOLIS today and get 1,000 work and 1,000 bank tokens when you become a member of OPOLIS by May 25th, 2022, and get started working your self-sovereign life. ReFi summer has arrived, and CELO is here for it. CELO is the layer 1 blockchain for the regenerative finance movement. It's fast, planet positive, and built for the real world. CELO has committed towards producing a sustainable future from the very beginning, and is the world's first carbon negative, EVM compatible layer 1 blockchain. CELO has become much more than a technology, a currency, a community, or even just a layer 1. CELO is a movement to create conditions of prosperity for everyone. You can soon engage with all of this via green asset Uniswap pools on CELO, benefiting reforestation and other regenerative products through the Toucan protocol, Moss, and more. ReFi is also about the health of communities, and Resource Network is creating bankless infrastructure for circular trade and mutual credit networks to benefit small businesses and local economies, all on CELO. Follow along on Twitter to learn more about how CELO is accelerating ReFi summer for a positive impact on people, communities, and the planet. If you're attending ECC, visit the CELO Saloon to learn about what's happening on the front lines of ReFi from industry experts.
Hey, Evan, what's up?
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you. So tell us about Funding the Commons.
Love to. Funding the Commons is a conference that we've been putting on, Protocol Labs, been putting on to bring together people with resources who want to have more nice things generally, not in the like fancy things, but in the like, this is why we can't have nice things. Maybe the reason we can't have nice things is actually just We lack the tools for coordination and the mechanisms to express or measure progress in the ways that we actually want. And so the thought is, can we bring together people with resources who want to fund those types of things? Can we bring together mechanism designers, economists, sociologists, or anthropologists who understand the network complexity of human interactions, and then some number of doers ranging from designers and engineers to operations people to communicators generally, to try and take those three groups, focus them on scoped problems and directions, concrete paths that you could take, starting from ideas and ending with deliverable products that can help humanity coordinate better to create more public goods and commons.
Mm-hmm. What I think is so fun about this, at least from my perspective, is that Gitcoin's been running an event about funding the commons called Schelling, and y'all are running this event called Funding the Commons, which is a Schelling for funding the commons. So we both kind of independently arrived at convening the people and talking about regen coordination in order to make sure the commons are well supported. So it's just fun to me that we arrived at that same place together.
Yeah, and I feel like Schelling is very complementary, where it does a lot of the mimetic engineering and propagation, the forming, storming, and norming within the GreenPilled community, if you will, and then Funding the Commons is trying to take a small group that already have a fair amount of context and get them to start performing on that fourth step.
Nice. So we're kind of building a funnel together and optimizing for different parts of the funnel, it seems like. What would you say the world is that y'all are trying to create, or trying to create a Schelling towards, an attractor towards?
Yeah, I think it's very much the very strong overlap with the GreenPilled ideology. The idea that a lot of the positive externalities in the world these days could become incentivized or promoted in some way through new mechanisms or better tooling, that there's some amount of philosophy around decentralization, user empowerment. I was drawn to Protocol Labs because the role was roughly pitched as, we're going to embed human rights into digital infrastructure and save the internet. And something about that strongly resonated when I joined Protocol Labs in 2017. And it's since then turned into, can we take the learnings that we have from the crypto community around the value, limitations, but also powers of things like decentralization, and apply those to larger, more complex systems outside of simply cyberspace, and use those things like the recently discovered power of memes to control, to influence everything from culture to the stock market, and see if we can engineer those interactions to drive outcomes that are more positive, more representative, and come with hopefully less existential risk.
Right. Okay. So reducing existential risk, supporting public goods, helping humanity coordinate. I guess I'm sort of curious about this experiment at Funding the Commons that y'all have done with impact certificates. So you're going to be presenting impact certificates to every speaker at Funding the Commons on Friday. Can you tell me why you're doing that, and what the potential is for impact certificates in your mind?
Absolutely. I become very enthusiastic about this idea because I think that while there's a lot of incentive mechanisms you can build that are like, do this thing and you'll get money for it, kind of carrot, like financial carrot type incentive mechanisms, that social incentives tend to be some of the more interesting ones. And for those of you who don't know what an impact certificate is, I would give you the example of like rookie baseball cards. People who collect baseball cards will love having the earliest card for their favorite player from well before they're famous. I imagine you probably have similar things with like tour shirts from bands, or like early albums in
Merch.
vinyl.
Yeah.
Like something that proves that you were a fan of this thing before everyone knew it was big, before it became a real thing. And the thought with impact certificate is, why don't we have something like this for unprofitable impact, for like, I guess there's some of this for funding science, but you could imagine that like whoever created some nonprofit to go on and capture some number of some number of tons of CO2 or provide accommodations to some number of the unhoused becomes the kind of thing where like these are efforts that are hugely impactful, but no one can really talk about or show or demonstrate support in a like reasonable way culturally and also kind of technologically. And so the Impact Certificates project is trying to address this.
Nice. So I kind of think of most of our listeners are probably familiar with carbon credits, which is basically a proof that you've taken X number of tons out of carbon out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Impact certificates are just kind of like carbon credits, but
Generalized.
but generalized towards any sort of impact. Like, and that can be impact that's like spiritual capital, social capital, intellectual capital, many different sort of vectors of impact. So a generalized carbon credit or like a baseball card for impact is kind of how I think about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of the work that has to be done is to find a thing to do with these. There's definitely a concern that as soon as you have something that people might be trying to buy and sell, that you might be instantly financializing these things. And overfinancialization has led to many problems with society generally. And so we're not leaning too far, like dangerously far into that. We're wary of that potential risk. But the thing that we want to have is a real use case. Like if someone collects a thing and you show in that thing, they will love the opportunity to share that with you. And so the hope of this experiment is that we can turn conferences, especially conferences like Funding the Commons or Schelling Point, into places where you can talk about and present the impact that you have supported in the form of presenting these impact certificates. And so the experiment itself is that we told all the speakers, if you describe an impact certificate to us that we can mint for you, or you bring one to us, we will talk about it when we introduce you, or you can talk about it for the first minute or two of your talk. And so the idea is to give people a nice spotlight for something that may be unrelated to their talk, but that they want more attention to be brought to, because all of these projects are things that they care about because they spent time or money to support them. And the idea is that it's very aligned with the conference generally to support more of these unprofitable but impactful things.
Got it. So it sounds like there's this big idea of what if we could prove impact using cryptography and blockchains, impact certificates that show like as an NFT and the impact that you've had, and they could be used for bragging rights or maybe have other utility in a decentralized society type of world. We just had Glenn and Pooja on the podcast to talk about decentralized society. Check out that episode if you want to know what that means. But basically, the tangible small experiment is that at Funding the Commons, you're presenting impact certificates to every speaker and sort of creating social norms in that space around impact certificates. And so, what kind of outcomes are you looking for from that experiment?
Yeah, I would say that there's kind of two halves. One part is the tooling side, where we want to make it very easy to generate these impact certificates. Impact certificates certificates of impact. The general idea has been around for a few decades, but there's been a renewed interest because of all of the potential that crypto brings around security. The idea is that you could make these with non-fungible tokens becomes pretty intuitive. And the idea that you would also potentially link some of these to your identity in a soul-bound token DSOC kind of way makes a ton of sense. And so trying to seed a small user community so that we can support people building the tooling for this. And then the other side is trying to build the culture and the mimetic value. And I think that there's definitely a good chance that because the GreenPilled movement and the general alignment within the community of trying to create more public goods and commons is really valuable. strongly aligns with the idea that we could create a culture where this is just the norm. And once we've created a cultural norm, then to be a part of this culture, then suddenly you have all of these new affordances to support public goods or commons.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So it seems like, impact certificates are possibly really powerful for social reasons and from a reputation reason. Can you say more about other ways in which you think impact certificates could really be a powerful primitive?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely a cultural and mimetic value of can we create can we create a tone? Can we create norms around the fact that when you're participating in regenerative crypto economics, you're going to be supporting all sorts of the infrastructure you rely on, doing lots of general like financial, but also like labor, paying it forward, either to smaller teams that are younger that are doing things that you have done, or teams that you rely on that build infrastructure. To the extent that we in crypto don't have the equivalent of taxes to pay for infrastructure, we kind of have to all come together and support it ourselves. The idea would be that we could build something culturally that's much closer to. My mind jumps to the example of. I'm pretty sure this is the case, but I'll caveat that it'll be worth fact checking this before this goes up, possibly. My understanding is that in ancient Athens, paying taxes was something that people were very proud to do, and it was considered a privilege. Very few people would actually, like only the richest members of society would pay taxes to support the government and the city state, and doing so became a like mark of prestige that people would make sure they did. And the idea that you could jump from that to where we are now seems absurd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so different culturally. So maybe we kind of have a world in which you create positive impact for the world, either by building or by funding, and you've got an impact certificate that you can kind of display as a trophy case. And it just seems to me like we just got through this bull market where NFTs were all the rage, and the whole meme is overpriced JPEGs. And what if these overpriced JPEGs had cool art but also a meaningful impact on the world? What would the market / mimetic Schelling points around those NFTs look like? And that ancient Athens example is one example of the prestige that maybe they could create.
Yeah, and I think that usually when people look out at the world, the scope of change that is imaginable seems too narrow. Mm-hmm. And if you imagine that we could convert ourselves, we could, like, this is the Wild West. We're building our way into a new form of society, if not civilization. And there's very much a sense in which the sky isn't even the limit about the kinds of shifts that we can engineer around what's valued, what's not. I like to think of the weird example of, like, if you imagine someone trying to explain a supermarket or a department store to someone who exists in a barter economy, I think the leap in the amount of organization, coordination, information flow that would be needed to explain what it means to put a price on everything just starts becoming absurd. But I think that we can make that kind of a jump from here, where we talk about having signaling and communication and information flows, and to some extent also like valuation and value flows toward things that are impactful but not currently priced.
One of the things I love about what you just said about trying to describe a supermarket to someone who lives in a barter economy is that it's kind of like a hindsight 2020 thing, where like we live in the world with the supermarket with the more complexity, and so therefore we can kind of think about that mental gap that you need between a supermarket and a barter economy. But then when you take that and you flip it and you look forward and you say, hey, imagine there's a world in which every positive impact in the world that you had was issued as an impact NFT. And these impact NFTs were really valued either by investors or by people mimetically, like on your Tinder profile, you show your impact NFTs or something like that. And what that does is it creates this Schelling point for funding the commons, for supporting coordination, for supporting public goods. Like, to me, that feels so far-fetched that it would systemically change the behavior of many agents, people in the system, that it feels as far for me as a barter economy to supermarket. But it definitely feels plausible when you think about the primitives that are available in crypto. So what do you have to, is there anything to add there about sort of the difference between looking backwards and looking forward as we try to engineer this new world?
I totally agree. There's like definitely a huge amount of fog looking forward. And I think that there's like, this is part of why I think pulling in experts from like into funding the commons is really valuable. We have, I'm really excited to have someone with a background in labor organization, because like this, if you think about what DAOs do, a lot of it could be viewed as exactly the same problem as like forming unions. And the question becomes, what lessons can be learned, carried, brought over from topics like that? And as we bring in all of these different fields together, I think we're building a more complete picture about what DAOs could or should do in terms of scoping the problem space. And by bringing together enough experts, you can kind of see a little bit farther into the future, I think, or I claim. And then other than that, it's just lots of prototyping experiments and trying to see other things at the wall and see what sticks.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, y'all bring in the experts and the people who are academically credentialed, and I think that I'll be the guy who takes it from that and makes it into a meme that fits in 280 characters. So it's been a nice combination of things. But I also think that one of the things that's really exciting to me about impact certificates is that any of us could build them into their platform. So as a modular money Lego, you could put impact certificates in your OpenSea and show them off. You could put them into your NFT thing that you have on your wall and show them off to visitors to your house. But with Gitcoin Grants 2.0 being a modular open source protocol, we're really excited to connect impact certificates to Gitcoin Grants. And you could maybe even sort by which grants have had the most impact in the world.
Absolutely.
So that modularity is, I think, is like a key feature for these impact certificates, especially in a DAO-based world, as you said. What do you think about financializing impact certificates? So say someone who has a lot of social clout in the Web3 space tweeted that they bought an impact certificate that was, let's say it was an impact certificate for removing 10 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, or that they brought 10 people out of poverty, or they funded, let's say, Prismatic Labs, which is an ETH2 client, for a year, and they have an impact certificate for that. Like, what do you think about a world in which we've engineered enough demand for impact certificates that anyone who's creating impact now has a business model because they're creating impact? Do you think there are dangers in financializing impact certificates, or do you think that that's a feature and that, you know, it's just like a moral right for people who are creating impact to get paid, and therefore we should financialize them?
I think that over-financializing things is definitely a danger. I really enjoyed the book, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets, which highlights a few instances in which financializing a good led to a perversion of that good, or like non-rational behavior in like a homo economicus sense, or like not purely rational, because behavioral economics is needed to explain or understand why people behave in this seemingly unrational way, because the economics of like making, or I guess economics is largely about how humans make decisions, and sometimes people make decisions based on things like morals instead of pure rationality. And when that happens, you can sometimes have weird emergent effects from financializing the things. I do think that there's something very valuable about having signaling around things like this. One thing that I particularly like about impact certificates is that if you look at philanthropy now, there's some significant incentive to have the amount you donated be the thing that measures how much impact you've had. And I think that separating the cost from the impact itself and trying to have some mechanisms to value the impact, or at least make impact more comparable, becomes really interesting, because suddenly the influencer who's tweeting about buying an impact certificate for 10 tons of carbon, the first question that I think people might start asking is, how much did that impact certificate cost? Because you can offset 10 tons probably surprisingly cheaply with current carbon credits. And so, like, I think some of the things that people will be presenting most excitedly are, look, I managed to have all of this impact for this small amount of money because it unblocked this person who was able to do this, who like worked with this pool to unlock these resources to make this whole thing happen. And I just like managed to tap the domino, and I could be tapping dominoes all day.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this kind of gets into effective altruism territory. And for the listeners who aren't aware of that, it's basically a movement that says that, hey, most actually charitable giving is about making the giver feel good about themselves, not actually about creating impact in the world. What if we deeply audited different organizations in the world to figure out which ones are having the most impact and channeled the most dollars to the places where they're the most effective? Effective altruism. And so impact certificates kind of bring cryptographic verifiability and decentralize governance in order to figure out what's effective and what's not. And so as long as you have a legitimate piece of governance that's saying, yes, this impact certificate actually did have this amount of impact, then we can kind of create verifiable effective altruism. And I think that we can optimize for efficacy instead of just cost. And is any pushback on that? Did I get that mostly right?
I think that sounds right. There's actually a lot of documentation about impact certificates or certificates of impact on the EA forums, et cetera. Right. And so many of the resources I draw from or point people to are there. I think the thinking is definitely strongly aligned. One thing that I emphasize to distinguish funding the commons generally and some of my personal philosophy from a lot of the effective altruism perspective is that I think that there are various metrics that you might want to use to evaluate different paths. And we try to be more agnostic about what those value mechanisms might be, with the idea being that people are going to bring their own time, their own money to these mechanisms. And if they're going to be contributing those things, then they should be the ones to be able to apply their own value, judgment, metrics, et cetera, to those. We can make it easier and better to measure, but we try to be less opinionated generally than I think effective altruism as a movement should be and is.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So there's sort of like a decentralization of value systems that is enabled by the decentralization tech, but we should still learn from what the effective altruism community has pioneered with impact certificates. We shouldn't reinvent the wheel here.
Yeah, and huge synergy. We've made grants to people in the EA community to pursue some of these ideas. I see us as collaborators and I see them as collaborators and potential users for a lot of the things we're making.
Yeah. One thing I just want to address real quick is, so this idea of NFTs as impact certificates kind of demands a question about gas fees on blockchains. And I just want to say that I think that this model is maybe not viable in a world in which you take 10 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere and that's worth, like, let's call it $5 on an L1. But since Ethereum's got a roll-up centric scaling strategy, it'd be pretty plausible to mint that on Optimism or Arbitrum or Polygon and have impact certificates cluster on these roll-up chains, and therefore the economics kind of change on there. So this is a criticism I've heard of verifiable effective altruism and impact certificates before, and I just want to say on L2s, I think the economics totally work. And I don't know if anything to add about
verifiable things, you can always stick it on Filecoin.
Yeah, that's true.
We do have a lot of storage space.
That's beautiful.
And you're probably putting the data on IPFS anyway. So
yeah, you probably are. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to just add, some listeners might not actually be aware that Filecoin and IPFS are products of Protocol Labs. So I've collaborated on some things. I made all of the figures for the initial Filecoin white paper, in fact.
Beautiful. OG.
Yeah.
I actually made the mistake of, when I first wrote the Gitcoin protocol in 2017, storing JSON directly on the blockchain, and quickly learned the primitive of storing on an IPFS afterwards. So lots of technological innovation at Protocol Labs that we haven't gotten into because I think we're focused on funding the commons and impact certificates. But yes, check out IPFS and Filecoin for storing these things. Do you think that NFTs are the right primitive for impact certificates, or should we be looking more at like verifiable credentials or like DIDs for this technology?
I think that those two, DIDs and verifiable credentials, solve a problem that is necessary, not sufficient, and complementary to impact certificates and the NFTs, like the potential for NFTs to address those. There's some interesting pieces around how, like, when you do a thing, you receive some value from doing it potentially, and you also receive some like social credibility. And I actually really enjoyed the time I spent helping out with source cred stuff because they had this distinction between your cred, which was your reputation score, and your grain, which was roughly your proof of contribution, was like the way I liked to think about it, where your like that is fungible. You either contributed time or you contributed money by buying the grain from someone who contributed time. And I think there's something really valuable to having the fact that reputation is really unsellable. Like if you have worked as the maintainer for a project for ages, then like that reputation will stay with you forever. And that matches really well onto the infrastructure of DIDs or like SVTs or things like that. But it makes sense for some of these impact things to be transferable. I also like the idea that maybe this is like this particular thing is this NFT impact certificate is cryptographically unprovably yours until you burn it, at which point you make it no longer transferable. There are interesting ideas like that that could be strongly motivated by like regulatory reasons or user reasons. I don't think that we have enough progress with experiments to say exactly how we want it to work, but we're working on some like theoretical groundwork. There's a talk on hyper certificates from David Dalrymple at the March Funding the Commons that kind of starts into some of the theoretical framing of how we're thinking about this. And I think that there are NFT primitives that could be sufficient.
Got it. So sounds like you really enjoyed your work on the Source Cred project, which basically is a plugin for GitHub, Discord, several other places that allows you to see who's got the social capital and has created impact within a community. And what they did that was innovative was they decoupled the financialized resources, which is things that you can sell to pay your mortgage, from the reputational resources, which are soul-bound to you in Vitalik's parlance. And so decoupling those things is maybe one way to sort of think about when verifiable credentials are worthwhile versus NFTs. And so did I sort of capture that correctly there?
That's a really good summary. And I'll say that SourceCred did a lot of interesting things. I really liked the fact that they managed to generate those reputation and proof of support amounts highly algorithmically, but with community input.
When you shop for plane tickets, you probably use Kayak, Expedia, or Google to compare ticket prices. So why would you limit yourself to just one exchange when you trade crypto? When you make your trades, you want to make sure you're getting the best possible price on your trade, and that's why you should be using MATCHA. MATCHA has smart order routing that splits your trade across all the various liquidity sources in Ethereum, and is also operational on Polygon, Avalanche, Binance Smart Chain, and other chains. Trading on MATCHA is super easy because it pools the liquidity for me in a single, easy-to-use platform and allows me to make limit on-chain orders, so you can set and forget your DeFi trades, and they will go through automatically while you're away. So when you're making a trade, head over to matcha.xyz/Bankless and connect your wallet to start getting the best prices and most liquidity when you trade your crypto assets.
So, you've got some money, but how are you going to use it? You want to spend.
You, me, shopping, now, bro.
When you know you should be saving.
You'll never buy a house at this rate.
But what if you could spend and save at the same time? For the enlightened kind, with inquiring minds, a new world awaits. Set yourself free with completely flexible self-repaying loan technology. supported on desktop and mobile. Seize the power of ALCHEMIX, allowing you to spend and save at the same time. Leverage your wealth without risk of liquidation. Take out a loan that repays itself. By using yield from your deposit to pay off your balance, your only debt is time. What was once inconceivable is now within your grasp.
You're winning some.
So I guess I'm wondering next if you could tell me about this idea of hyper certificates. It sounds like it's like supercharging impact certificates in some meaningful way. Can you tell me what that is?
The overarching idea, and we'll also link the talk from Funding the Commons about this, but the general idea is to provide the right layer of abstraction so that you can talk about impact in a very rigorous but still fairly user-friendly way. If you imagine how one might trade or represent their contributions to an effort previously, then you probably want to be able to specify what the name of the project was or what the outputs were, who was working on it, what time period they were working on it, and additional formalities so that you could then take that and either lump it with other efforts or proceed to split it into smaller efforts. And so you should kind of expect some amount of high-dimensional fractal detail on people's time and how they spend it, and you're really just representing some sub-block of all of human activity. It's a very small sub-block, but the idea is that with impact certificates, you probably want these to be able to merge scalably. So you can describe whatever level, you can succinctly describe whatever level impact you're thinking of.
Right. Okay. So it seems like kind of hyper certificates as a data layer for collective decision mechanisms is maybe one thing that I heard there. But they seem like they could be really powerful. What is it like? This is kind of like, what does the world look like in which you're maximally successful, or like impact certificates are maximally successful look like? Take us from barter to supermarket on this one. Like take us into the future of if it's maximally successful, what it looks like.
I wish I could. The best I can do is point in a general direction and say, I think it's going to be like this.
That's good enough.
It's going to be a lot of experiments that will get us there. But I hope that we have enough progress and adoption, and the short term maximally successful is has a lot of people at the beginning of conferences having this be a standard thing that people do, and there's a lot more impact certificates out there being supported, being created, being purchased. Every impact certificate purchased is some number of dollars going towards something impactful. Right. I think that it would be worth, definitely when the technological backend is developed, have some amount of money with every subsequent trade of an impact certificate go to the original person who minted it.
Right.
And I think that if you just think about the number of the amount of value that went to artists with the digital art NFT movement, imagining that we could do that in an analogous way, do something analogous to what NFTs did for art for the general category of philanthropic or nonprofit ventures. Just imagining the amount of scale that we could have there seems incredible.
Well, I always think of the internet of money has the ability to change everything in society that relies on money, because now we can send value across a computer network. And the analogy for me is that the internet of information changed everything in society that relied on information, because we could now send information across a computer network, and that changed entertainment, media, politics. We didn't even have social media. God bless you. For the people who are watching the video, I haven't just sneezed, so that's why I had to say God bless you. But you know, the analogy for me here is that okay, so the internet of money, you know, looking at this the way the internet changed everything in society that relies on information, the internet of money could change everything in society that relies on value transfer. And right now the hot categories are like capital formation, which was ICOs, decentralized finance, which is DeFi, and then like NFTs, which is changing how art is funded. And there's this whole like $10 trillion category around like how governments spend money in NGOs that no one is really talking about right now. And just the scale of the impact where impact certificates and impact DAOs could disrupt NGOs and how impact is created, I think that is not really an explored category of this technology yet. So it seems like you think that there's a lot of scale there, like as much scale as how NFTs changed how art can be funded can happen for NGOs and how impact happens with this technology. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's something really interesting and fundamental about how like the DAO is like DAOs are roughly the like minimum abstraction of both corporate governance and like nation state governance in such an interesting way, because you can kind of fill in that spectrum however you want. And like they address the fundamental problem of there's a group of people who want to do a thing and they want to do a thing together. How do you figure out what everyone wants and turn those into a set of priorities and share resources and allocate them against that thing? Corporations do this, governments do this, DAOs do this, but I think DAOs do it in an interestingly general kind of way.
Yeah. So how we coordinate is the meme that I land on.
Yep.
I
was going to add that I think at the end of the day, there's the question of how easy is it for people to make a society that looks like what they want? There's also the slightly tangential question of the society that they think they want, which may or may not, like the changes they think they want may or might not lead to the society they actually want. Trying to close that gap is very interesting and valuable. But there's also something really compelling around just making it easier for people to understand how to make informed decisions about how to elicit, provide, and aggregate preferences. I think that a lot of I wouldn't be surprised if things from funding the commons or impact certificates generally and the pricing thereof were used for a more like decentralized city type governance, corporate governance, things like that.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's like an expression of preferences for what the world wants, and that's like the demand side. And then the more supply side of those impact certificates could actually be the fulfillment of that expression. Putting it in a market-based term. Yeah. I actually have something in my notes from one of our previous conversations about the main challenges for impact certificates, and I was just going to rattle through them real quick. So we think that value in secondary markets, enabling a creation of a liquid market with buy pressure for impact certificates, is like a challenge to overcome. Assessing impact, so using governance to create credible neutrality of impact certificates, which ones are actually legit and which ones aren't, is the second category. And then assigning credit shares to contributors for people who created the impact. So in a world in which those challenges are solved, it seems like we can realize the potential of what impact certificates could do for the world, is my interpretation of that. Any pushback there or anything to say about that?
I think that sounds roughly right. I think that having sufficient locked demand is something that we need to generate. And I think that presenting impact certificates at conference kind of addresses that, or may address that. And so the hope is to find out. The idea being that like most baseball cards aren't being held by people currently trying to auction them. There are people who want to buy them for reasons other than just reselling them. And that creates that ends up driving a lot of the value that exists in them. And so I think we need to see that in impact certificates. That'll be very valuable. We also do need enough demand that there is the value in secondary markets and liquidity that you mentioned. And then I think that there are interesting potential hacks for credible neutrality of impact certificates, where like maybe you could have it come with have an impact certificate come with a formal legal agreement that says, I transfer none of my like naming rights, intellectual property rights, etc., only bragging rights. This is what bragging rights means. I haven't actually looked into this legally yet, but I think that it seems like the kind of thing that would be very reasonable to say, like, an impact certificate is this, and I promise to I promise to consult the current holder of this before minting another impact certificate. And if it comes with that, then you at least have the legal enforceability of the nation state government to and governance to enforce the neutrality / uniqueness of that impact certificate. So maybe we'll have weird hacky solutions like that.
Right. So sort of decoupling the reputational and like ownership of an impact certificate from the bragging rights allows us to create a liquid market without getting too much into hyper financialization, and the downfalls of that is sort of how I interpret that.
Yeah, like there's less need for a single trusted minter of impact certificates if some of them come with legal agreements.
Right. So in a world in which we've solved for these challenges of impact certificates, there's value in secondary markets. We've assessed impact. There's credit shares assigned to contributors. And, like, do we get to a place in which we've kind of aligned value captured, which is what business models are based off of? How much money can I get into my bank account? Do we align value capture with value created for the world? So basically, anyone who's creating impact and creating value for the world now has a business model. Do those two things kind of collapse if in a world in which we're maximally successful with impact certificates?
I think that is absolutely the hope. The question of whether or not they do is, I think, still open. But I think that there's I have been swayed by some of the arguments of modern monetary theory, which claim that the purpose of minting currency as a sovereign currency issuer, which in classical MMT is like the U.S. government, and in like crypto flavor MMT is like the Ethereum community. I think that when you're issuing a token, you are trying to direct attention toward things that you, as the community of currency issuers, care about. And how we get to a point where you can effectively elicit and aggregate the preferences of what those people care about and allocate new resources towards that feels like the best possible outcome for creators of a currency, or for members of, like, citizens of a society, be it a decentralized society or a centralized one, or hopefully both.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a beautiful outcome for me to think that I could pay my mortgage, put food on the table for my kids by just focusing on creating a positive impact, whether that's in my local community, picking up trash, volunteering, or at a systemic level, taking carbon out of the atmosphere, or supporting our digital open source software. There's just so many systemic network goods, public goods, regen causes that people could work on. And the fact that they could earn a living doing it, I think, to me, seems like that just seems like the chef's kiss to me. That seems like such a thing to shoot for.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the story where I think Toyota donated time to a food bank or a soup kitchen type thing. And managed to more than double, I think, the output number of people fed from that soup kitchen. And like, it feels like there's definitely impact like that could be made, and simply building mechanisms to direct attention toward those opportunities and then celebrate and reward those opportunities for having been pursued and captured successfully. Is really impactful.
Yeah, beautiful. And in an attention economy, I think the direction of attention via financial primitives or maybe social primitives is kind of like the biggest lift that we have, because we all only have 24 hours of attention. or I guess depending on how much you sleep, less than that. So in an attention economy, I think that's kind of the resource that we're directing towards these impact causes. And that could be really systemically valuable, creating a world in which everyone's creating impact and getting paid, getting coins for doing it.
Absolutely.
Well, I know that we're 5 minutes over on recording already, so I suppose we should wrap. What is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to say, Evan?
I think I wanted to try and plug the term network goods, if you'll let me. The idea is that in economics, you'll typically have the distinction between things that are either rivalrous or non-rivalrous, and excludable or non-excludable. You'll typically hear things like the tragedy of the commons, where
Right.
grazing pasture land is a commons and people come graze on it, and it like everyone wants to take it from everyone else. Eleanor Ostrom, Nobel Prize in Economics, for showing that like there are some conditions in which this does not actually become a failure mode. Like there is such a thing as shared pasture land. Ostrom's law states that anything that works in practice can work in theory. And with a lot of these digital goods, the gap between something that is excludable or non-excludable, or rivalrous or non-rivalrous, tends to be a little blurry.
Right.
There's also an interesting category of things that are anti-rivalrous, where forking a project can bring a net
Value
increase
back to it.
in
Yeah.
the attention value. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like Bitcoin Cash version is like a perfect example of anti-rivalrous. You can just like see the number go up after the fork. Anyway, so we've been using the term network goods to plug this, and my team is the network goods team at Protocol Labs now, formerly PL Research, and we're the ones putting on the Funding the Commons conference. So if you stop by and you get a fun shirt with a pithy slogan on it, it will also include the network goods logo.
Nice. Well, that seems like a good place to get into call to action. So if you're in New York, stop by the Funding the Commons conference on June 24th. How do people find you online? Any other sort of call to actions for people, Evan?
Miyazono on Twitter. And if you have an interesting idea from this, definitely send an email to commons@protocol.ai. And if you missed this Funding the Commons, we are doing them roughly quarterly. I think we're doing the next one end of September. And you'll be able to check fundingthecommons.io to find, to get updates.
Beautiful. And I should also say that you and I are in the middle of an RFP process in which we are talking to several people in the Gitcoin and Protocol Labs community, the wider Web3 community, in order to build impact certificates. So trying to figure out what the architecture of this stuff is, make it easy to mint them, make them credible, and actually put this into practice. So we'll have a link in the show notes to the RFP for that as well, that people can check out if they're serious about building this infrastructure. Evan, thanks so much for being on the GreenPilled podcast. Appreciate it. And so happy to be working with you and the Protocol Labs team on this stuff.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I'm super enthusiastic about it too.